Tonight I wanted to talk about something that has been on my mind for a long time, ever since seeing this halacha years ago. But I discovered something also very troubling about this halacha that I feel I need to unburden myself and share with you. The Ramah, it actually starts in the Darkei Moshe, quotes from a sefer called Shailas Uchuvas Binyamin Zev. Binyamin Zev was a great Torah leader in the late 16th and early 17th century, right shortly before the Shulchan Aruch is written in Greece. And you'll see in a second what he says. But this is codified in Shulchan Aruch, so it has a lot of importance. In Siman Tzadi Ches, when we're talking about the laws of davening and specifically how a person is supposed to have the proper koved rosh and the proper kavana, the proper sobriety and fear of heaven when he comes into a synagogue. And that's really what this is all about. You know, the Mechaber starts off the Sif by saying, "Hamispalel tzarech sheyachavim belibo, pirush hamilos shemotzi b'sfasav." And when a person davens, he has to think about what he's saying and know the words. And he has to then v'yachshov ki l'shchina kenegdo, and he has to imagine that the divine presence is right in front of him, and so forth, and he goes on and on and on. I'm not going to read the whole thing, so you can look it up. But then the Ramah carries on this theme, and he says, "V'yachshav kodem hatfila meromamus hakel yis'ala uv'shifla sa'adam." A person before prayer should create a contrast in his mind between God's loftiness and his own insignificance, the insignificance of man. V'yasir kol ta'anuge ha'adam me'libo, and he should remove all human pleasures from his mind. I have no desires. I just want to serve my Creator. There he's quoting I believe it's the Rabbeinu Yonah. And then he says, "The asur la'adam lenashek banav haktanim beveis hakneses k'dei likvoa belibo she'ein ahava ka'avas hamakam." It is forbidden for a person to kiss his small children in the shul in order to embed within his heart that there is no love like the love of the Creator. There is no love like the love of God. And therefore it is not appropriate to demonstrate love of any other human, of any other party, even your own children, when you're in the house of God. So you should not kiss your children when you're in a Beis HaKnesses. And this, by the way, applies to not only your children, but to your grandchildren, because there's really no svara to make that distinction. So your grandson or your granddaughter comes running over to you in shul. They want to sit on your lap. They want to give you a kiss. And the halacha is in Shulchan Aruch, no kissing. No kissing. No kissing permitted. And the question then becomes, so what am I supposed to do? You know, does this mean that the synagogue is not a place of joy, is not a place of expressions of love to my children? Don't I want them to get that good feeling about shul is a loving place, shul is a warm place? So how do we reconcile that? That's really what gnaws at, I believe, a person who might be troubled by this. I'm certainly troubled by the halacha, and I openly confess it. The Levush adds the words, by the way. You don't have this in front of you. The Levush says that you should also, you're demonstrating that va'ahavas banav eino nechsheves klum keneged ahavaso, that the love that you have for your children is nothing compared to the love that you have for Hashem. And you have to demonstrate that by not being expressive in your love towards your children. Kemo she'asa Avram Avinu be'akedas Yitzchak. Just as Avram demonstrated at the Akedah. So you have to treat your children like they're on the Akedah. If Hashem says, I want you to serve me, then there's no one else. Ein od milvado, when you're in the synagogue, there's no one else to love except for Hashem.
We're not fixating on the word nashik. I mean, is chibuk or any other form of show of affection, or is it how specific is the mechaber?
The Ramah
Right.
says specifically and only nashika, kissing. I'm going to get to that. It's an interesting point that you raised to me, because the Svara would argue that any sign of affection, including hugging, yeah, right, would be forbidden. As we'll see, Reb Zilberstein, at the end, if we have time, asks a shaila, what if I want to let my child or grandchild know I love them, and they're expecting the kiss, but I want to abide by the halacha? Can I just put my mouth like that on their cheek? That's where Reb Zilberstein asks the question. So we'll take a look at that in a second. Is that a violation of the halacha or not?
Is it only by children, or because we have a lot of different cases of kissing and hugging in shul, a chassan and a bar mitzvah, and there's all kinds of...
Excellent question. We're going to get to that as well. There's first the famous Magen Avram, which is elaborated upon by the Mishnah Berurah, that many of you are familiar with, but it's based on this Ramah. In other words, it's got nothing to do with the law of kissing, but one of the side points that you do see from this halacha is that you're bringing your small children to shul. And this is where the Mishnah Berurah, based on the Magen Avram, launches into the importance of maintaining decorum with your children in the Beis HaKnesses. So the Mishnah Berurah quotes the Shalah, and he says, "B'Shalah kori tagral hamivim yiladim leBeis HaKnesses, v'hainu k'tanim she'adayin lo higiya l'chinuch." The Shalah is strongly critical of people who bring small children who are not yet educable to the shul. Mitam ki hayeladim misachkim u'merakdim bebeis haknesses u'mechalim kedushas beis haknesses. He says, because small children run around and play and dance, and they violate the sanctity of the synagogue. V'gam mevalbelim das hamitzpalalim, and they also fardrei the other people that are there. Va'od gam ki yazkinu lo yasuru miminhagam hara asher nischanchu biyaldusam lihishtageya ulevazos kedushas beis haknesses. And furthermore, it's terrible chinuch, because if they're raised in that kind of environment where they are used to running around and being vildechayas in the synagogue, what happens if a small child was a vildechaya in a shul? What happens when he grows up? He remains a vildechaya in shul. That's why you have disruptive service even among some of the adults, because they remember, that's what I did. I used to run around in shul and talk a lot. So what's wrong with doing that when I get older? Aval kishehigiu lechinuch adarabba yevienu ito lebeis haknesses v'yelamedehu orchos chayim. But when a child has reached the age of education and is able to sit without ants in his pants, then you should bring that child to shul. Teach him the proper pathways of life, leishev ve'ema uviyira, to be able to sit with awe and with trepidation. V'lo yanichenu lazuz mimekomo. Do not allow him to fidget and to run around. V'yizarzehu lanos amein v'kadishu kedusha ayin shom b'sof inyonei tefila u'kriyas haTorah. And he says, and that's what you should try to encourage your child to answer properly to Kaddish and Kedusha, etc. And v'ayin b'tanat ve'eliyahu gadol ha'onesh sheyesh lahab sheminichas b'no lanos dvarim shel hevel u'tiflus b'beis haknesses. He ends off by saying that the Medrash says that there's a great penalty or great punishment awaiting a father who allows his child to say foolish things inside the Beis HaKnesses. Now, that's really just a side issue, but it's a very important side issue because it's something that's predicated on the fact that you see from the Shulchan Aruch that the practice is to bring your children to shul. When you bring your children to shul, make sure, says the Shalah, that they're old enough that they can sit and not fidget, and make sure, says the Ramah, that you don't kiss them. Now, here comes the interesting thing. The source that the Darchei Moshe quotes is someone who was either the Ramah's contemporary or lived just only a generation before him, called Reb Binyamin Zev of Greece. And he writes, and this is the source, he says, Matzasi b'sefer ha'aguda I found in the Sefer Haguda, which is one of the Rishonim, the brachos per ketzad mevorchin mishum sefer kolbo, and the Sefer Haguda quotes the kolbo. The yesh misaftim im yesh levarach zman al peros she bekro, right? That whether or not you should make a shehechiyanu on fruit that is in your stockpile, bein yud zayin latamos latisha b'av. So this is halacha number 1. Now it has to do with making a shehechiyanu during the 3 weeks. And then he goes on and he says on line 3, presumably quoting the same source, V'lo yenashek adam levanav beveis hakneses lahudia she'ein ahava ke'avas HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You should not kiss your children in shul to demonstrate that there is no love like the love that you have for God. And then he says, Ve'ein lihiskotet ba'avur shum mitzvah. And the third thing that he quotes these Sfarim as saying is that you should not fight over any mitzvah, kegon galila sefer Torah v'chayot seba, such as the Hagba and Galila, and any other mitzvah, because you're supposed to be a tzanua, and you're not supposed to push your way in to do mitzvahs and to take the beam and stuff like that. 3 halachos that are completely unrelated, the latter 2 having to do with synagogue etiquette, but he quotes the Sefer HaAguda in the name of the kolbo. So I want to share with you what, this is the part that disturbs me. It's not in the Aguda, and it's not in the kolbo. Now, it's not because I'm such a bucky in the Sefer Haguda and Sefer Kolbo, but I know how to use the Bar Ilan CD, and I know how to search for things on the computer, and it's simply not there. Now, it could be that there was an edition of the Aguda that Rabbi Binyamin Zev had that was lost to us that we don't have. But if the Aguda quoted the Kolbo, we don't have the Kolbo that he quoted. So it's neither in Sefer Haguda nor is it in the Sefer Kolbo.
What about the issue of the bracha?
Of making I couldn't find that either. In other words,
because maybe only the first part is reference to that.
So I was thinking about that. The only problem is that the way that the Darkei Moshe quotes the Binyamin Zev is he quotes him as saying that like even if you see Binyamin Zev, look at the parentheses in the Shulchan Aruch. Binyamin Zev in Kuf Samach Gimel va'aguda per ketzad mevorchin. So it's quoting the Aguda in the now the Ramah did not write those bracketed parts of the Shulchan Aruch, but he quotes him in the Darkei Moshe that way. So it's not that there's no source for it at all, but I do want to point out that it's not sourced in any of the earlier texts other than one source, which is Sefer Chasidim. Now that's not a bad source. Sefer Chasidim from Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid is a very important halachic source. It's a primary source of deriving halacha. It's a Rishon, but it's important to know that this is not sourced anything earlier than Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid in the 12th, 13th century. And the other thing that you need to know is that Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid was big into the mysticism of kissing. So, and I'm going to show this to you as well. So I'm sharing this with you only because this halacha has disturbed me for years as being something that is so, for me, is so difficult as a father of small children, and now as a grandfather of small children, who wants to instinctively be able to take his children and grandchildren, put them on his lap, give them a kiss, and make them feel like they're loved more than anywhere else in the world when they're inside the shul on their father's or grandfather's lap. So that's why this is a difficult halacha for me. The fact that it's not in the Aguda, it's not in the Kolbo, makes it more difficult for me. So I want to take a look at the Sefer Chasidim. Yes?
Just as a quick aside, is there any difference between Ashkenaz and Sfarad? I mean, the fact is that
no.
The Shulchan Aruch himself didn't bring it, and it's only brought in the Ramah. So
you're right, but you'll see from the Sephardi poskim that we're going to reference, the 20th century Sephardi poskim, who deal with this issue, that it's an important issue for them as well. we'll also see that Moroccan Jews have a particularly difficult time with this halacha. And you'll see why in just a second. If you know any Moroccan Jews, you know what does a Moroccan Jew ought to always do with you when he sees you? He doesn't kiss you on just one cheek. He kisses you on either cheek. And that's only if you're lucky and you can escape in time. Because then he'll kiss you on, I don't know where else he's going to kiss you. But they're very kissing. Right?
And again, is there a distinction between basic Knesses in general or Dafka B'Shat Tefillah? Because the Shulchan Aruch is saying, it's on the Hilchos Tefillah, so he's talking, but the Mishnah Berurah seems to be talking about basic Knesses.
Right.
In other
right.
words,
well, I'm not sure if you can extrapolate from the Mishnah Berurah, because it's really just connecting the din of the Shalah. Shalah never talked about kissing at all. He's just basically bringing in this idea that the very fact that you see that you can bring your children to Shul for Tefillah B'Tzibur indicates that you have to be very careful also how old they are and how well behaved they are. That's really what you see from the Mishnah Berurah. It certainly seems that we're dealing with times of davening, because if you want to bring your child into Shul to drop off your talis before Shabbos starts, I can't imagine, I'm not sure, but it would be hard for me to fathom that even then you shouldn't kiss your child, but it could be that that's true also. You'll see in just a minute. We'll talk about an interesting halacha from Reb Herzog. Okay, the Sefer Chasidim is very short. Lo yenashek adam beveis hakneses es beno, velo beveiso lifnei rabo. So first of all, Sefer Chasidim doesn't talk about beno, banov haktanim, doesn't mention small children. It just says, don't kiss your son in the shul. Doesn't say that when he's small. Just don't kiss him in shul. And do not kiss him in your house even, in the presence of your Rebbe. So that might actually answer or address your issue, Simi. It's related to the situation. It's a situational halacha, not so much dependent upon the place, but upon the situation. If your Rebbe is there, it's wrong to kiss your son in the presence of your Rebbe because you don't want to show a love to any affection to anyone else other than to your Rebbe in the presence of your Rebbe, says Rebbe Yehuda HaChassid. Would you control me to close the door, please? I'm sorry, Mr. Benoit. Thank you. Okay. And then he goes on to another kissi halacha. La'achar shekara b'Torah menashek sefer Torah al shem yishakeni menashikois pihu. You should kiss the sefer Torah after you get your aliyah. V'im nizdamin lo rok yorok v'achar kach yesh lo lenashek v'lo yinashek v'achar kach yorok. And if you have saliva in your mouth, spit it out before you kiss the sefer Torah. Don't kiss and then spit, because that doesn't look nice. It looks like you're going feh after you kiss the sefer Torah. That's back in the good old days when people used to just spit on the floor when they had to spit. I have in the last page of this source a whole bunch of different citations of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid talking about the importance of kissing. He gives it's in the tzavah of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, what he gave over to his children. One of the most important things he said is that don't kiss a dead child. In other words, if God forbid a person loses a child, there's a great temptation to want to kiss the child or kiss a loved one. You can't kiss a deceased a corpse. That's absolutely forbidden. He also talks about if you meet up with a ghost of a loved one and the ghost wants to kiss you, you should not kiss the ghost. A shade, he calls it, a demon. Another thing from the Sefer Chasidim is that if you kiss your wife or your child and they have dirty mouths, then you should not kiss a sefer afterwards, but clean your mouth out first. He also says that there was a certain pious person that he knew that when he would only kiss his loved ones, his children, ela kishahaya sameach lidvar mitzvah v'libo sameach ba'abas HaKadosh Baruch Hu haya menashkem b'fihem. He would only kiss them on the mouth when he was filled with joy and the divine service of God, kidei shemachshavto tikanes b'liba, because he wanted his love, his ruchnius, to enter into their bodies by kissing them on the mouth. So you see that there's this metaphysical power to kissing. He also says that there was one case where there was a community where he knows of where a man told his son, he told his son that after he says Be'irachas ba'u ishu beno v'tziva ha'av libno k'sheyikra b'Torah shelo yelech al birkov lenashek ki hayaharbe sham shelo hayalahem banim v'tziva libno ken kedei shelo yehela magmas nefesh. He says, after you read the Torah, I don't want you to either kiss me or that come for a kiss. He says, because there are many people who don't have children in the shul and they're going to feel bad. It'll give them a terrible feeling if they see me kissing you, and that they're not going to have that same pleasure. Okay. Anyway, so you see that there's a lot of discussion about, probably more than any sefer that I found talking about kissing is from Sefer Hasidim. So that's where that's really where the source that only source I've been able to find for this halacha. Now let's talk about some of the halachic ramifications of this. Rav Kook deals with this tshuva in source number 5 in Shailas Tshuvas Orach LeMishpat. He says, "After legabi dina de iser lenashek banav haktanim nira lanias daiti du urcha demil senoket harama." He says the halacha is cited as don't kiss your small children, right? But I think that that's only speaking in the vernacular. That's only addressing what is common. Shaharei b'makaros harishanim u'biyuchud b'yuchud. I'm not sure what b'dalad means. Sefer Chasidim or b'das Sefer Chasidim is finration and heikos of stam lo yinashek adam b'veis hakneses says b'no. Right, just so like we quoted before from the Sefer Chasidim. He says, based on that, he says, Nir delo cholku ben gadol v'katan v'hakol bichlal ha'isr. He says, it would seem to me that there's no distinction between age of the child. V'chein nir mid'mesayim shom b'Sefer Chasidim v'lo b'veisa lifnei rabo. Nir d'chutz me ha'inyan shlo la'aros ava cheres chutz me avas Hashem yisbarach. He says, so what you see from the Sefer Chasidim is he equates this also to the prohibition of kissing your child in the presence of your Rebbe. He says, so that what that means is that what you're doing is not only showing that you have no other love except for Hashem, yesh bazem mishum neged emas v'kavod harav. He says that there's still also an aspect of reverence, that you shouldn't be kissy in the shul because you're supposed to, it's a place of reverence, that you're supposed to be in a state of awe when you're in a holy place or in the presence of someone that's your Rebbe. And that's why it would make sense to me that there's no difference if your son is an adult or your son is a minor. He says, and therefore it would make sense to me that it's not just your son that you're not allowed to kiss in front of your Rebbe. You shouldn't be kissing anybody in front of your Rebbe. He says, and that's in the same thing. Don't kiss anybody in a shul. Like that was David, your question. Maybe he says, but perhaps you could argue that there's a machlokes between the Sefer Ha'aguda and the Sefer Shailos Utshuvas Binyamin Zev that the Ramah quoted in the Sefer Chasidim. He says, "V'al kol ponim nir she'in lechalek l'maisa bazeh lahatir l'nashek banim hagdolim b'veis hakneses." But at the bottom line is, and by the way, Rav Kook says, unfortunately, I don't have copies of those Sfarim. I don't have a copy of Rabbi Binyamin Zev. I don't have a copy of the Aguda. Now, it's fortunate that he didn't have a copy of Aguda because he would have been looking for a long time and never would have found it. But if the Rabbi Binyamin Zev is quoting the Aguda and it's not in the Sefer Aguda, maybe is it possible that it was quoted to him from the Aguda and the person who quoted to him was really quoting from the Sefer Chasidim? So it's not even shaykh to even talk about a machlokas in the first place if there aren't two primary sources. But in any event, he paskins, Rav Kook paskins, she'ein l'chalek l'maisa bazeh, lahatir l'nashek bonim g'dolim b'veis hakneses, Kedas kvod Torah so shlita. I agree with you. There should be no distinction. And just like it's forbidden to kiss your small child, it's also forbidden to kiss your adult child. There's no reason to distinguish in Svar. Interesting tshuva from Rav Yitzchak Herzog. Now it's interesting because this is another tshuva that I found. We had a tshuva from the first chief rabbi of Israel. Now let's look at a tshuva from the second chief rabbi of Israel. Here's his tshuva. The she'ela that he asks, and this is a whole shaila that's worth its own shir at another time, is im nachon laharshos lasus chuppah v'kiddushin b'veis hakneses. Is it permissible to make a chuppah in a shul. It's an allgemeiner shaila. And of course, in our shul, it's permitted because when they built the shul, it was built al tanai in the first place, that it should be permitted. It should not, the kedushas beis haknesses should not preclude us from being able to have a chuppah in a shul, which normally would not be permitted, but since it was done al tanai for that purpose, it's perfectly fine. But let's look at part of Rav Herzog's argument. You'll see how it's related to our discussion of kissing. He says this tshuva is written in 1942, and turn the page. He says, Hine b'Poland eretz moladati uvelita. He says in Poland and Lita, b'chefi hayaduli b'chol hamedina shayu nechlalos b'malchus Russia ad hamilchama holamis hakodemis. He says all the Jewish communities that I'm aware of in Eastern Europe, up until World War I, noagu lazos hachuppah tachas kipas hashamayim v'lo hayamakom l'she'ilazu. Everyone used to make their chuppahs under the stars of the sky, and there was never a shaila. Like even if you made a chuppah in January, everyone went out with their freezing coats in the snow, and they went and made the chuppah outside. It's just the way everyone did it. Ela shebederech klal hayu mahadrin la'asosa b'chotzer beis haknesses o samach lebeis haknesses. People still did it in the vicinity of the shul because it was a local, public area. Uchesheba Abba Mari zatzal Medinas Anglia. But then when my father moved to England, I think Rav Herzog's father, I don't know if he was a rabbi or whether he took a different kind of work position in England, the Hevi Osi Ito, and he brought me with him, and we know that, what was Rav Herzog before he was chief rabbi of Israel? Chief rabbi of Ireland, that's right. Right? You would know that, don't the Frankels come from Ireland?
Yeah, they knew it.
They knew Rav Herzog. So anyway, Shama Matzanu Sha'osem HaChuppah B'Beis HaKnesses. For the first time, we discovered that people were making chuppahs in the shul. V'amnam lahaisa daito nochem mizeh legamrei. And my father, I guess he must have been a Rav, because my father was not so happy about this. Avolo haya b'kocho l'shanot ki kvar nagu kach mishanim rabot. But there was nothing he could do about it because it was already an established minhag. V'chein ani acharav. Evdal mimenu l'chaim tovim ibadel mimenu l'chaim tovim aruchim keshenit maneti l'rabanuti harishona b'ir Belfast. That he says, I too, I should be divided. My father's no longer among the living, but I'm among the living. But when I took my first stellar in Belfast, in Ireland, matzati oto haminhag be'Ireland v'lahaya b'kochi l'shanot b'shum ofan. And I wasn't able to change the minhag of making a chuppah in a shul. Ach lo hinachti sham lahanhig lenagin b'shat hachuppah b'pos harimonim v'afilu b'piana. But he says, but the one thing I didn't permit them to do was to make songs with at the time of the chuppah with the pos harimonim, some kind of bells or cymbals that they used to use. Almost sounds like a church type of sound, or with the piano, with the organ or the piano. That I didn't let them do. I didn't want them to bring that into the shul. V'ulam kan be'artzeno hakdoisha. But now that I'm the chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael, right? And Harei, I don't know what Taf Lamed stands for. Eimanu minhag ra zeh. V'chol hamishaneh yado al tachtona. He says, Baruch Hashem, we don't have such a minhag established here to have chuppahs in shuls. And now people want to come and they want to start making chuppahs in shul. No, we're not going to permit it. Lo mi boy etzel ha'ashkenazim she'en l'shanos miminhagam lasos ha'chuppah tachas kipas hashamayim. He says, so for sure we must insist that the Ashkenazim stand firm in their Eastern European minhag of making the chuppah outdoors. Ela afilu etzel asfardim she'en makpidim al kach va'osim ha'chuppah b'bayit v'adai she'aleinu lihitnaged l'chadashot lasot ha'chuppah b'beit mikdash ma'at. Say they make chuppahs in wedding halls, but we should certainly not allow them to make a chuppah in a synagogue. V'hinei ein laharich b'davar zeh shekvar herich b'zeh hagon hatzadik. Reb Chaim Mazuz, is it? I don't remember in the Stei Chemed. Mareches chasam v'kala v'chuppah v'kimat shelo hiniach makom lihitgader bo u'pashutu barur shaleinu limnoa davar zeh mikama tamim u'mefuratim sham. The Stei Chemed goes through a whole arichus as to why we should not permit it, and I don't even need to write any more. But then he adds one more paragraph, and there's actually a longer tshuva, but I'm going to end with this paragraph that you'll see why this is relevant. He says, V'ani mosif, she'afilu banim ketanim asur lenashek b'veis haknesses. He says, let me add one more point. He says, you're not even allowed to kiss your smart children in shul, as the Ramah says. Uvechuppah, I efshar limnoa mihitnashkut meguneh. He says, what happens at a chuppah? Simi, you made a chuppah not too long ago?
Yeah.
What happens at a chuppah? Everyone says
each other. I mean, I was davening, but everybody else.
Normal people kiss each other, as Simi just pointed out. Shalo rak hechasna, he was saying Kriya Shema, because he was like Yaakov Avinu. Shalo rak hechasna v'hakala mitnashkim, elegam hakrovim v'yedidim anashim v'nashim. He says, not only do the bride and groom kiss, he said, which of course is not something that we permit in Orthodox circles anymore, but apparently this was something that was done in Rav Herzog's time, and could be because he was dealing with, a very Israeli, perhaps a partially secular population. He says, but even, krovim and friends, relatives, friends, men, women, the Isser Mavish shel kirva de arayos v'nida beveis hamikudash la'avodat Hashem. He says, what a terrible thing to take place inside a synagogue, in front of the Aron Kodesh, that you should have people kissing like that that's a violation of basic halacha, of having physical contact with the opposite gender and so forth. V'ani hayiti mazir tamid b'chutz la'aretz b'chtav u'va'al peh shelo yitnashku. I've always made a very strong protestation, both verbally and in writing, that people should not be kissing. And he says, a lot of times, sometimes people listen, sometimes people don't listen, but I've had a lot of agmas nefesh about this, confesses Rav Herzog, that people should come to a synagogue and start kissing each other. Now, of course, it all depends on the kehillah, but I'm sure you've been to certain synagogues where nothing like this would ever happen at the BAYT, but to have men and women, either during or after davening, going to each other in the hall and kissing each other good Shabbos when they're not married, that Rav Herzog says is an abomination. You can't stand for that. You can't permit that. But nevertheless, the point is that you see from his point that he takes the halacha seriously, that it only adds to the violation of the halacha if people are kissing in the Beis HaKnesses, and he doesn't make a distinction whether it's banav haktanim. He says if banav haktanim is aser, where there's no sexual undertone whatsoever, then surely if men and women are going to be kissing inside a shul, that's only more of a reason not to have a chuppah v'kiddushin inside a shul. So, in other words, listen to what he says. He says that even if you could find a heter to have a chuppah inside a shul, which is certainly what we do here, you have to be very careful. Don't have kalus rosh in a holy place. And don't allow people to kiss each other that are not supposed to be kissing each other. And you see so far that this goes, that something that we take as so basic, that we kiss each other, and when we wish each other mazel tov at the chuppah, of course, what do your friends do? Simi, people kissed you invariably, right?
Still davening.
I probably kissed him while he was davening. But the point is that I wasn't even thinking about this halacha, right? And Rav Herzog said it's a violation if you can't kiss your children. You also can't kiss a person who just made a simcha. Now, I don't know whether there would be people who might disagree with this, but let's go a little bit further and see where we're going to go with this.
Really, according to this, it doesn't make a difference if it's davening time or not.
Apparently, yeah. Like Simi was arguing, yeah.
What about the building versus the actual, what about the whole building?
I don't know that you can make an issue out of the building. It's not a makom mekudash, so to speak, the place where you're going to have kiddush. You can't argue that that's such a holy place, a social hall. I would have a hard time extending it to that. Let's look at Harav Ben Zion Abashol, who learned together in yeshiva with Rav Avaji Yosef, was a great Talmud Chacham, and he writes in Shailos Utshuvos Or L'Tzion. Now these next three tshuvot are for the Sephardi community. And for the Sephardi community, this is a very big issue because they love kissing each other. They're very kissy people. So he writes, he quotes the Ramah, and he says, HaRamah b'simin tzadi chesef alav kasa, v'asur l'nashek banav haktanim b'veit hakneset, kedei likvoa b'libo she'ein ahava ki abat hamakom. But he says, "Umikol makom nir'eh she'amenashkim beveit hakneset derech kavod achar aliyah Torah o ba'amirat Shabbat Shalom u'chedomeh." He says, however, if people kiss each other after they get an aliyah, chazak u'baruch, chazak ve'ematz, on each side of the cheek, or when they want to each other Shabbat Shalom, he says, "V'lo kimenashek banav mitoch ahava." This is not love. This is not a sign of affection. This is a sign of kavod. He says, there's a difference. He says, "Yesh lehem al ma lismoch." They have what to rely on. Why? Keven she'ein ze ela derech kavod ba'alma. He says it's showing kavod because it's such an established thing that people show. They want to congratulate you by giving you a peck on the cheek. He says that's not a sign of love, it's a sign of respect. He says the same thing is true if a son wants to kiss his father when he sees him in shul, out of kavod, not out of affection. The Parshat Vayikra, Ot Yud Aleph Ayin Sham, the Ben Ish Chai actually says this explicitly. Va'az gam hagun shehem machzirim u'minashakim l'mishen oshek lahem. So if a son kisses his father, it's perfectly fine for the father to kiss his son. It's not. It's a courtesy. It is an etiquette. It's not a sign of ahava. So Harav Ben Zion Abba Shaul does make a distinction between small children and adult children, not like Rav Kook. Not like Rav Kook. It could be because of a cultural difference between the two. Rav Kook did not view kissing for any reason as a sign of etiquette, because that simply wasn't part of his culture. But if you're a Moroccan posek, then it is part of the culture, and therefore it's more justifiable. But now take a look at the sharpness of Rav Ovadia, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He writes as follows in Yabia Omer. He has a much longer tshuva about this, but I figured I'd shorten it for you. Be'inyan ma shenagu she'achar aliyatam l'sefer Torah b'Beit HaKnesset mitnashkim im ha'oleh b'amirat chazak u'baruch. He says, regarding the matter of that after a person gets an aliyah, he gets a kiss from different people when they say chazak u'baruch, and he says chazak ve'ematz. וכבוד תורתו חיזק כאן את דבריו שבשאלות תשובה ותשובות עמק יהושע חלק ג' שיש לבטל המנהג. He says, you who are asking me this question cite from this other tshuva sefer, Emek Yehoshua, that he says that we should abolish this practice, that you should nullify this minhag. Al pi masher kotav b'sefer ha'aguda, she'asur la'adam l'nashek et banav b'beit ha'kneset, u'laharot lehem ahava v'chiba, that you're not supposed to kiss your children in shul. Notice he conveniently takes out the word ketanim, even though he's quoting Sefer Ha'aguda, this mysterious Sefer Ha'aguda that I wasn't able to find. And because you're not supposed to show your children love and affection. Ki alav likvo bilibo she'ein ahava ke'ahavat haborei. V'chein katav b'Sefer Chasidim, v'chein pirish harama b'haga, ובוודאי שאין חילוק בין נשיקת בניו לנשיקת רעיו וידידיו. There is clearly no distinction in halacha between kissing your children and kissing your friends and your loved ones. Uvein gedolim lektanim. There's no difference between adults and children. Dezil batar ta'ama. Go use logic. Logically, there's no distinction to be drawn. Now we saw that his contemporary Harav Ben Zion Abba Shaul said there is a distinction to be drawn, because of course, if it's derech kavod and it's not derech ahava v'chiba, so then maybe you could justify it. But he disagrees. He said, then he quotes Rav Kook. He says, "V'chein kasav hagon Rav Avram Yitzchak Kook b'shut orach mishpat. V'chein hiskim imanu yedidenu hamanoach hagon Rav Yitzchak Chazan b'sifro Yechav Edat." And then he says, "V'av shira'iti liyedidenu hagaon hagrash mashash." He says, my dear friend, the Gaon Harav Mashash, tries to defend the practice to this minhag. He says, Ki'ilu kol minhagei Morocco yordu min hashamayim ka'halach l'Moshe miSinai. Because he wants to argue, to defend the practice as if all of the minhagim of Morocco came down from Shamayim as a halacha l'Moshe. You know that this is an ongoing, this was an ongoing feud between Rabbi Ovadia and many Moroccan Jews. That's why many Moroccan Jews did not accept Rabbi Ovadia, because Rabbi Ovadia was strong. He said, we go like the Beit Yosef, not like the Ben Ish Chai, not like any of the other Moroccan or African poskim, and if someone disagrees with the Beit Yosef, they're out. And here he was basically being mavatil centuries of minhagim for Moroccans and Algerians and so forth, and it was very difficult for people to accept this, what Rav Ovadia was doing for them. So there was a lot of internal fighting over these kinds of issues. He says, of course, this is something that crept in error, and therefore we have to be mevatel the minhag and teach people not to kiss each other for any reason in synagogue.
Is it in the Beis Yosef?
No.
He's basing his dinner on the Ramah.
He's basing it on the Ramah. He's basing it more he's more on Sefer Chasidim and the Shalos of Shuvas Binyan
He's very
Yosef.
typical. I mean, the Maran, it was always the Beis Yosef, it was always the Shulchan Aruch.
Right.
And it comes back to the point that was raised before. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't have this.
Shulchan Aruch does not have this.
It's an interesting.
It is very interesting.
Where it comes from.
I have a suspicion, and I could be wrong, that this could have been part of a polemic against Moroccan minhagim. But I don't know. I don't know that for a
Right,
fact.
the series really going to town on the.
Right.
But it's interesting. I mean, because you mentioned the Beis Yosef.
Yeah. Okay. The son of Rav Ovadia in the Yalkut Yosef cites a very similar thing. He quotes first of all the Shut Binyamin Zev, b'shem Sefer HaAgudah, she'asar adam lenashek et banav b'veit HaKnesset u'laharot lahem chiba. כי עליו לקבוע בליבו שאין אהבה כאהבת המקום, וכן כתב רב יהודה החסיד, וכן פסק הרמה. Then he says, ולפי זה, according to what we've just quoted, הדין שאסר להתנשק עם העולה לספר תורה חסים קריאתו, it's asr to kiss someone after you get your aliyah. His aliyah, ve'en lechalek b'zeh ben gdolim lektanim, again like his father said, no distinction between adults and minors. Shal kol panim mishum avas hamakom umor shchina tzarech lihimana mizel legamer. You have to demonstrate an exclusive love to God and also a sense of awe of Hashem, and that's the reason. So that's what it's based on. So there's no distinction. V'chein v'kasav b'shut arach mishpat, quoting Rav Kook once again. V'chayotze b'zeh pasak b'ben ish chai she'en l'nashek yedei krova b'beit hakneset o poel et yedei haba'al bayit shelo. And also, the Ben Ish Chai writes you should not even kiss the hand. Because remember, among many Iraqi and Iranian Jews, that's the minhag, is to kiss the hand as a sign of derech eretz. What's that?
He also kissed the beard. Like
the beard.
With Rav Ovadia, they used to come and kiss
Okay. Okay, but he said that Ben Ish Chai talks about kissing the hand. He says you should not do that in a Beis HaKnesses. V'lachein mitzvah levatel haminhag therefore, we should abolish this minhag that many people have, that after a guy gets his aliyah, everyone comes up to give him a kiss. It's not a proper minhag. He says, but v'hani mili boy lemimrinu b'nichuta ki heichet lekablu minei. Now look at the irony here. Of course, this is Rav Ovadia's son. In case he's learned his lesson. My father got into big hot water with the Moroccan community when he tried to be a tough street fighter. He says, you got to know how to present this to the kehila, right? You got to present it to them with nachas. Tell it to them nicely, so to try to be persuasive and not to come down hard on them. V'noda she'etzli yotzei Morocco nagu came ba'artzam u'v'makomot moshavam b'chutz la'aretz. He says, I happen to know that the Jews who hailed from Morocco did this in where they come from and also other places in chutz la'aretz. But when they make aliyah, whether they're coming from France or Algiers or wherever they're coming from, they should change. They should know that we don't want them to continue this minhag. Because it's not something that's accepted in other communities. He quotes the same Rav Mashash that his father quoted. בין ההודה הרמה לנידון דידן, שהרי הדגיש בדבריו בניו הקטנים שדווקא בהם שיש לאדם חיבה יתרה ein lenashkam beveit hakneset, ma she'en kein bigdolim, she'en osim kein derech chiba ela derech kavod. He says, perhaps, says Rav Mashash, we can defend the minhag that the Moroccans do because they're doing it derech kavod, like we said before. They're not doing it to show love like a small child. V'akol hora'at shalom v'yididut. It's rather just an etiquette greeting. Ve'ein bazem miut ahav al Hashem yitbarach. And therefore you're not minimizing your love of Hashem. But he says, umikol mokom. Me'achar v'kan be'eretz Yisrael lo nahagu bazeh kol ha'edot v'nir'eh hadavar kimar'eh chiba beveit ha'kneset. He says, but that's just not going to fly here, says Rav Yitzchak Yosef. He says, you know what? He says, it's one thing if everyone in the whole city does it. Then you can argue that it's an etiquette. It's not a sign of love. But if only a few Jews do it, because other Jews that daven in the shul with you are not familiar with that Moroccan minhag, then it does look like a sign of affection. וכיוון שיכול להסתפק בלחיצת ידו או בנישוק כף ידו, נכון לשנות המנהג ולא להתנשק עם העולה לספר תורה בבית הכנסת ואין כאן מקום להאריך. He says, but therefore, you could get by with just a handshake. You could get by with just maybe kissing the guy's hand. That would be much preferred than giving him a peck on the cheek.
Is he coming out against showing any affection or just kissing?
He's talking about kissing. Hugging, we haven't seen anyone is objecting to.
He's talking about chiva.
Yeah, I understand. Obviously, you're certainly not abiding by the spirit of the law if you give someone a very prolonged hug. You give him one of these shuckling hugs, how much I love you, right? Even if you're not going to kiss him, it's still not abiding by the spirit of the law. וראה רוב הדברים בשו"ת יחבדס חלק ד' בשם המליץ על המנהג לנשק ידי האב או ידי הרב לאחר שסיימו את קריאתם בתורה שכיוון שהקדוש ברוך הוא ציוונו על מרום וכבודם ונשיקת היד הוא דרך כבוד לאדם גדול ומכובד. He says there my father actually defends the practice of at least kissing the hand. He says kissing the hand, he says okay, I can sanction because that's a sign of kavod. Hashem wants us to show honor to our parents. And that's why it's a mitzvah to do so in the shul as well. He says, and therefore we can definitely sanction a student or a child kissing his father's hand after he gets an aliyah. But if they're just relatives or friends and they're not people that you have to show honor to, then even kissing their hands you should not do. Okay, before we go into Reb Zilberstein, let me just tell you that the new Sefer Mesoras Moshe, which just quotes Ba'al Peh, things that were observed by Reb Moshe's grandchildren of things that he used to do, just a small little paragraph over here. He says, Ucheshava ben Dodi Reb Mendy Greenfeld le New York levakeres Rabbeinu. He says, once my cousin, this is one of the Tendlers speaking, he says, my cousin Mendy Greenfeld came to visit New York to visit Reb Moshe. Nichnas acher Shachris liyeshiva em yeladav. He came into the Beis Medrash after Shachris with his little children. Ubo lifnei Rabbeinu v'nasan Rabbeinu lahem neshikot. So they come to Rav Moshe, and Rav Moshe says, "Oh, shalom aleichem," and he comes and he gives them all hugs and kisses. Achar kach amar li Rabbeinu deme'achar sheli yeladim kitanim im lo tinashkem yargishu ra. Listen to Rav Moshe. He says, you know what, the truth is, if I wouldn't have kissed them, they would have felt terrible. They would have felt terrible. Nechshav zeh kimin sorech litein lahem neshikot. That's why I felt it necessary to give them kisses. Mimela muter letalmid chacham kein la'asot beveis midrasho. So it's permitted for a Talmud Chacham to do in his Beis Medrash. Now, this is all oral tradition, and it's very difficult to make an inference from this story. But one thing I am inferring, if you're someone who hangs out in the Beis Medrash, and this is like your place, your makom, where you're sitting and learning all day, and this is therefore like the first time you're seeing these kids. They came from Cleveland, or they came from New Jersey, wherever they came from to visit Rav Moshe, and he hasn't seen these kids. If I did, these are my einaklach. If I'm not going to kiss them, what they're going to think that I don't like them. In other words, in that situation, there Rav Moshe was able to sanction kissing them, because there you're averting children getting a bad feeling that Zaidi doesn't love me. It's a very, very fine distinction.
But we know that there's a difference in halacha between the base medrash and the basic knesses with regards to many things, including eating, drinking, sleeping. Here he seems to be picking on the idea that it was in base medrash. And
I think you're being medayek too much. I think because, like I said, this is oral tradition.
Okay.
You have to take it all with a grain of salt. All we know is that Rav Moshe kissed his grandchildren. I mean, maybe what you're saying has merit. I don't know, but we'll never know.
Right.
Rav Moshe found it.
I don't know what the structure was. Was it in a shul? Was it in a?
It was an MTJ probably. It was in.
Right. So if it was in the basement, I mean, the thing is, I don't know, like a shul like ours upstairs is not used for learning. Right. For the most part, they wouldn't have the status of a base medrash.
We know we use it for learning.
Well, would you eat there? Would you eat in a like in a base medrash? You can eat.
Depends what tonight was made. Depends what tonight was made when they.
But there may not even be a base knesset then. If that's the
No,
case.
all of our Batei Knesses do not have that. But this is not totally on Kedushas Beis HaKnesses. It's totally, like we learned, it's totally on the fact that when you're in that mode of a Makam Kadosh, that you're not supposed to be demonstrating any ahava except for Hashem. I mean, if you want to argue that our Batei Knesses do not have Kedushas Beis HaKnesses to begin with,
No,
maybe
I'm not
but
arguing that.
maybe-
I'm saying that a base medrash would have a lower. Like if you're in the base medrash, you're learning, or let's say you're in your house, you're learning, and your grandchildren come over.
right?
That wouldn't be an issue.
Right, it wouldn't be an issue. Wouldn't be an issue because you're not there in front of the Shekhinah. This is not a place that is designated as a place where you need to show mora, awe, or that you have exclusive love for Hashem.
Would Rav Moshe have acted the same way for his grandchildren who were biased by him, or was he came to him?
It's, again, like I say, you can't really infer. All you can infer from the story is that they came to visit him from out of town, and because they came to visit from out of town, he was able to justify kissing them in the base medrash because this is the first time he's seeing them. So I don't know that you can infer anything else. This is again Torah Shabbat Peh. I also feel certainly on Simchas Torah that you can definitely be liberal, just like we're liberal in so many other halachas of Beis HaKnesses protocol, because it's a time when we want to show children extra love, so we dance and we do all of these things that many people don't do in a Beis HaKnesses. Okay. Rav Zilbershim, and this is what we'll finish with this just very briefly. He wants to know is Asur l'nashek banav b'beis haknesses ha'im mutar lahaniach pivu sfasav aleihem. However, can you just pass your mouth over them to demonstrate that you love them, even if you're not going to kiss them? Is that called kissing or not? So he says she'ela b'shulchan aruch kasuv Asur la'adam l'nashek banav haktanim b'beis haknesses kedei likvoa b'libo shein ahava ke'avas hamaka. He says, you want to show there's no love like the love you have for Hashem. And the question is, when you only place your mouth over the child's head, you just put your lips down on the child's head, and you're not puckering, and you're not making a kissy-kissy, you're just putting your lips on the kid's head, Im gam ze ne'esar, o shema rak ma'ametz hasfatayim asur. Is it only asur when your mom is giving a kish, or is it asur to even just demonstrate your love that way? V'chein yesh lehistapek v'ima shenadra shelo tenashek bena sheyivaled ad la'achar hamila v'nistapka im gam hanochas hapeh aleha bichlal haneder. I think that word should be bichlal haneder. And my other shaila, which is related to this, is that let's say this was a common practice that a woman, especially if there was a danger, if it was difficult, like in Russia, people had difficulty circumcising their children, so they would take a neder. I'm not going to kiss this baby until he has his bris milah. So what if a woman takes such a neder to incentivize her and make sure that the child has the bris? Is she allowed to put her lips on the baby without kissing and puckering before his bris? Would that be okay? Is that bichlal the neder or not? So he says the tshuva is like this. He quotes a Mishnah in Maseches Avodah Zarah that yeshiv lo kotes or yashav lo kotes b'fnei avodas kochavim lo yishchav yitlena b'fnei shenira kemishtachav el avodas kochavim. That if a person has a splinter in his leg or his foot, he should not bend over to pull it out in front of a getchka, in front of a statue, so that it shouldn't look like you're bowing to avodah zarah. And then it continues and it says, Mayana moshech lifnei avodas kochavim lo yishcha v'yishta mipnei shenir k'mishtachav el avodas kochavim. That if there's a brook that runs in front of a statue of an avodah zarah, don't bend down to drink from the water because it looks like you're bowing down to the avodah zarah. V'ino nira mutter. But if it's not clear that that's what's going on, if your back is to the avodah zarah, then it's okay. And then it says, Partzufos hamakalchim mayim lekrachim lo yaniach piv al piyem v'yishtem mipnei shenir kimenashek lavodas kochavim. What if you have a statue, like those cherub statues that you can find sometimes in the fancy apartments in Manhattan, where they're like water fountains and they have the cherubs and they're like that and then they're spitting out the water, right? So the question is, can you go over, you're thirsty, you want to drink of water, so can you go over to a statue that's avodah zarah and put your mouth on the mouth of the getchka? So the Brisa there says you're not allowed to do that either, because it looks like you're kissing avodah zarah. So, uveradvaz hikshal Rambam sheishmit esadin shal mayin hamoshech lifnei akum yun shamai shetirates eladika. The Radvaz doesn't understand why the Rambam left out part of this halacha about bowing down in front of avodah zarah, in front of a brook where there's avodah zarah. He says, "Ela dekasav deakati ikalamedak ala lefir girsos hanimsos b'sfarim shalanu dekatoni partzufos hamakalchim mayim b'krachim ayiniach piv." He says, I don't understand this halacha about the faces that are spitting out water. He says, "V'i partzufos hanyu akum mamish." He says, why are you calling that it just looks like you're kissing? You mamish are kissing. If you're putting your mouth over the statue's mouth to get water, that's the definition of kissing. He says, maybe that's up, because you're going to argue, well, it's not my kavanah to kiss. And davar sheinu miskavin is mutter. He says, but there are some people who say that we don't paskin like Reb Shimon, that a davar sheina miskavin is mutter. Just because it's not your intention. If at the end of the day you're kissing, you're kissing. So why say that it only looks like you're kissing? He says, and for so anyway, so the Radvaz goes into this whole arichus over there. And the Radvaz therefore, therefore he changes the whole girsa. He says the statues themselves are not avodah zarah. The statues are shooting out water in front of avodah zarah. So that's why it only looks like maybe you're kissing the avodah zarah. But even though you're mamish kissing the statue itself is not avodah zarah. The Hinei b'sefer Nevei Shalom. Herich lahakshal diver Radvaz b'soch devar kasav shein l'tayik miloshen hagamor shenira kiminashek the l'chora b'minashek mamish. He says the Radvaz's premise was a mistaken premise. When you put your mouth over a statue, that's not kissing. Mishum shemayri ba'ofen shelo havi nashika mamish or elo havi nashika im lo nashek al yedei havarat v'hana'at hasfatayim. He says it's not called kissing unless you pucker and you kiss. So therefore the Gemara could be talking about the statues of avodah zarah, and it's only usher because it looks like you're kissing, but you're not mamish kissing. So Reb Zilberstein wants to be medayik like this. He says, "Ve'ulai hu adin b'she'elatenu hanachat peiv lo havi nashika, v'rak ba'avodah zarah hachamura ne'esar v'lo b'veit hakneset." And therefore we could argue that maybe that's the whole issue over here. He says maybe just placing your mouth on a surface is not called kissing unless you're puckering and making the kissing motion, the suction or whatever it is, or the exchange of body fluid or whatever goes on when you're kissing. But he leaves off with, and I'm not going to, you can see the rest yourselves, he says, V'tzarachiyim. He says, I don't really have an answer to this question. Could you argue that just like by avodah zarah, it's at least an isser d'rabbanan if it looks like you're kissing avodah zarah and you're not mamish kissing? Or could you say that since the whole din in the first place is predicated only on an Isser D'Rabbanan from the Shilas Uchuvas Binyamin Zev based on the Sefer Chasidim, that it's not really such a Chamer Dika din, it's not avodah zarah, for sure not, and therefore we could certainly justify an act that looks like kissing but is not mamish kissing. and he leaves with it Sarachian. I just want to finish off just by concluding that again, I'm not a happy camper. This Ramah is a Ramah, and it continues to stand on its own merit. But at the same time, realize that the Ramah probably, I don't know if he ever saw the Sefer HaGud, I don't know if he ever saw inside the Kolbo, he saw the Reb Shuvas Binyamin Zev. And if someone can find for me the Sefer HaGudah that says this, then I'll do tshuva publicly. But it just seems to me that it's on a shaky foundation, this whole halacha. And we know that there are many people, especially in the world that we live in today, that if they were not permitted to kiss their children in the Beis HaKnesses, that would be a big turnoff for them. So I don't think that this is a halacha that's worth putting in the bulletin or staking a claim on. It's just an interesting limud as far as, people from Bnei Anash that, that we want to make sure that we do everything according to halacha. Is this something that should become a priority as far as when our kids come to the Beis HaKnesses? I think a person has to use proper judgment and understanding the ambiance that he wishes to create for himself and for his children and grandchildren in the Beis HaKnesses, and to use proper jurisprudence. Yeah.
No, it's just interesting about how they define the shikha itself. I mean, especially when you read, especially with respect to the statutes, it's like mouth for mouth. Like, was there a different way of how they kissed back in the day than how we show?
No, the question is like this: what constitutes a kiss?
I mean, just by putting your mouth on the mouth. I mean, I don't know, because
is putting a mouth on a mouth, is that a kiss?
Right.
Or does there have to be a suctioning,
right.
a puckering, and
right.
a suctioning? Is that called a kiss also? That's the whole shiloh.
So does it mean basically kissing a kid on the head and not on the mouth? Would that constitute a kiss according to?
Reb Zilberstein leaves off with it Sarachian. He leaves off with it Sarachian. He says, I don't know what to tell you.
Also with
Where do we stand with
Ramah? I don't know.
With what?
With the Ramah, how we have defined a kiss.
Yeah, he said
this
whole shiloh is predicated on the halacha of the Ramah. He says, I don't know what the paskin.
The definition is that. What about a hug? That doesn't have a. I mean,
there's no restrictions on hugging, even though thematically we can certainly appreciate that a hug is of the same genre of chiba.
Right. So would we say that it falls from the shaila until we saw the idea that he seems to differentiate between where the lips go and all this? I would have, the simplest answer out of this would have been it's all the same. By mere fact that he's saying that there is, does this give a heter to the? I mean, the chassan hug is not a kiss, right? Or is it
the chassan hug? No, it depends. So certainly with what Rav Herzog talked about, I would be more careful to only hug and not to kiss.
Right.
In a Beis HaKnesses. That's certainly one of the things that I think we should draw out of this.
So that's be the easy, right?
That would be an easy solution.